Everyone to today's DHCW Digital Governance and Safety meeting. In the interest of time, and as we do usually, we're not going to introduce each other, but the first time you speak, if you'd like to introduce yourself then, that would be fantastic. I would like to welcome Alistair to DGNS. He's joining us. Thank you very much, Alistair. I'm sure you can make a great contribution as an additional independent member so that we can ensure that we are quorum in this committee at all times. And I'm also going to welcome a hidden face, which is Julie Robinson. So Julie is in the background taking minutes, and she's one of those special members of the team that makes these things run smoothly. So thank you, Julie. You're going to do a great job. I know that. I've been notified about apologies from Evan Evans, Laura Tolley, and Rachel Powell. I know that they will have made arrangements to have materials that they would usually presented by colleagues. I'm sure they'll do that very well. As usual, please note that there will be a private session at the end of this public session. That is where we focus on risks that are pertaining to security of information and systems. We don't discuss that in the public domain. We would not want any bad actors to learn things that would be to our disadvantage. But please be assured that we discuss all of those issues, concerns, risks fully, and then a summary is presented at the following DGNS. The committee papers and minutes have been uploaded to the DHCW website, so if you're joining remotely listening to a recording of this meeting, you will find all of the public papers on the DHCW website. We will have about a 10-minute comfort break, which is planned to be after item 3.4. If there's any flexibility that we need earlier, I understand weather conditions are harsh out there today, so if there's some unplanned flooding near you, please let me know, and we'll manage on that. And finally, the public part of this meeting is scheduled to run until 3 o'clock, with the private session beginning at 3:10. So I'm going to move now to declarations of interest. I haven't been notified of any declarations of interest, in which case we can move to the main part of the meeting, the standard declaration of interest that we always record in respect of one of my roles, which is associated with a business that analyzes consented de-identified data stands, but I don't believe there's anything today that would be a conflict. Okay, are there any matters arising that we need to add to today's agenda? Can't see any, so excellent. In which case, can we move to the consent agenda? So we've all received papers in advance. You should have had 2 sets of minutes. David's got his hand up. David, can I invite you to comment?
Yes, I want to come in on 2.3, Rowan. I didn't want to make you aware of that before we got
fantastic. We will do that. So let's start with 2.1. Minutes of the last meeting. There was both the public and the private abridged minutes that were circulated. Therefore, here for approval. Did anyone have any comments they would like to make? No? Excellent. In which case we can approve the minutes. So thank you, Julie, if you could record that the minutes are approved, and that's for the last meeting that was held on August the 3rd. The forward work plan has also been circulated. Was everyone satisfied with the forward work plan? Any comments? No. So I would like to commend our corporate governance team and colleagues who are keeping us on track with the forward work plan. And then terms of reference, and I know David, you had a comment on the terms of reference and the Special Health Authority governance update.
Yeah, thanks, Rowan. It relates to the fact that we've removed from the scope of this committee major programs because they now sit under the Programme Delivery Committee. I just wanted to check, probably with Chris, have we defined what constitutes a major programme yet? And in terms of all the things that we used to see on our programme overview, does everything that was on that now fall under the other committee? Or what I was concerned about is things falling between the cracks, that we only looked at the bigger ones off that dashboard, and some of the other things that we looked at might actually just fall between the cracks. So Chris, can you provide some clarification on that point?
Yeah, happy to, David. So the programme's delivery committee's meeting for the first time next week. As you're aware, the papers are going out. If they haven't gone out, they're going out in the next hour or two. Within the scope of those papers, it does define what constitutes what we are suggesting is within the scope of that committee remit in terms of major programs, and it does define major program as part of that body of work. It's not exactly the same as the dashboard that was put together for this committee, and I think one of the discussion points for the first program deliveries committee will be around scope and making sure committee members are comfortable with the transition from this committee, and as you say, making sure things don't fall between the cracks. I think there is a debate to be had about getting the right balance between oversight of the right programs, i.e. those that contribute towards our strategic objectives and significant impact on our operational delivery, and trying to cover absolutely everything. So I think it's probably, David, one for that committee meeting next week to have a full discussion about, because I think either way, whether it's more goes into the scope, it'll be through that committee that the scrutiny takes place rather than this one.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'd just put a marker down, though, that I think we're doing a good job of overseeing the in-flight programs, and I wouldn't want to narrow our focus just to the major ones, because the cumulative effect of some of the other programs may have an adverse effect on overall performance. So that's just me putting a marker down, really.
Yeah, okay, and I'll pick that up, David,
Yeah,
when we get to that at the meeting next week.
okay.
Yeah, and Chris, the other area which we can talk about next week and just come back with, there's no rights or wrongs as far as I'm concerned, as long as there's oversight, is that moment where major programs move out of development into business as usual, but then perhaps there'll be a major iteration and there'll be a sort of version 2 further development of a program. So I'm thinking perhaps of the patient app, which is proceeding well. When it's launched, there'll be other developments. How does the business as usual issues get overseen versus development? But I think we can work that out. We're just seeking clarity. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, Rowan. And I think that's another one in terms of scope of the new committee that we can pick up there.
Yeah. Any other comments? No, I think that's fine. So we'll consent agenda, I think we have moved forward through. So let's move to the main part of today's conversation and the action log. Chris, can I turn it over to you and just want to make a little small comment? I think it was a short action log, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was, Chair. And there was one action from last committee's public meeting for today, and with your agreement, we've moved that to the new Programmes Delivery Committee. It related to the NDR and oversight of that moving forward. And I think we agreed during the agenda planning, it didn't make sense to bring it here and then there a week later. So we're transitioning that. It's on the agenda for next week. So just to give that assurance around that action.
And that's just so colleagues are aware. It just it's a big project. The team is very busy, and asking them to present here and then there next week seemed to be an unfair use of their time, shall we say. So thank you for that, Chris, and thank you for that explanation. So let's move to the corporate risk register. Chris, if you could start by walking us through the 21 risks that we've got assigned to the committee, and there's quite a few of them that perhaps you could take us through on the trend analysis as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'm going to start off, if it's okay, with the presentation that was included in the packs around the corporate trending. And just while it loads, I'll just give a bit of context to this. So a year ago, Rowan, it was yourself that asked for some analysis since DHCW established of the risks that we've had, how we've managed them over, at the time it was an 18-month period of time. Since then, we've built into our work plan an annual review. So the idea is that we take risks that are assigned to committees, do the annual analysis and bring them through in October, November, and then bring a cumulative feedback to the board in November. So that's what I'll take you through today. And I will try and cover off some of the risk position as we are today as I go through this, and then I can go back if I've missed anything. So just to recap in terms of the context, so we approved a risk and board assurance strategy in May 21. A few aspects of that, all corporate risks going onto the corporate risk register are approved by an executive lead based on the risk score and the risk appetite for the risk in question. We agreed a risk committee assignment approach. So each corporate risk that goes onto the risk register is assigned a committee of the board for additional oversight and scrutiny. DGNS in particular, the Digital Governance and Safety Committee in particular, has an assurance role in relation to information governance, clinical informatics, cyber security, information services, organisational learning, and to date major programs. So risks relating to these areas over the last 12 months have been assigned to this committee. What that has meant is that the Digital Governance and Safety Committee has more risks assigned to it than any other committee of the board. So as of today, there are 26 corporate risks. 21 of those are considered or assigned to this committee. The risk register presents 12 in the public session today assigned to this committee, item 3.2i, and there are 9 risks that are classified as private, and we'll get into those in the private session. Since the last committee meeting, there have been 3 new risks assigned to this committee, 2 public, 1 private. They're both programme related risks. So as part of the transition to the new governance arrangements, 7 of the 21 risks that are assigned to this committee will transition over to the new committee. So the oversight of the programme related risks will move to the programme delivery committee. Those around cyber, information governance, etc., will remain within this committee's remit. So if I just move on, and if we just have a little look at the last 12 months to start with. So this period looks at the 1st of October 2022 to the end of September 23, so a 12-month period. We actually started in October 22 with 26 risks, and we've got 26 risks as of today, but that has changed during that period. I should say that it hasn't remained static. 2 weeks ago, we had 28 when we did this to the Audit and Assurance Committee. Over the past 12 months, 33 new risks have moved onto the corporate risk register. 34 risks have been mitigated or moved off the register and managed at a directorate or a lower level. So I think it demonstrates that the risk register has been dynamic during that period. And in terms of corporate risks, that equates to about 6% of the total DHCW risk register. So there's about 480, just over, risks recorded in DATEX. So an organisational wide view is there's 488. We tend to focus on the corporate risks, which are assessed by the exec lead as the highest risks for their areas, requiring a bit of additional oversight and scrutiny by the committee. So in terms of static risks during the 12-month period, And there are a number for the committee to consider that are assigned to this committee. It's worth noting before we get into them in detail, there's 2 risks that have been static or remained on the corporate risk register since our establishment in April 21. One of them relates to staff vacancies, and we had Alistair and Marilyn be aware, we had a good discussion at the audit committee about that risk and how that hasn't moved. The other one that has remained static since our establishment is 0237 new requirements impact on resources, and that risk changed from a risk we originally put on around managing with the COVID-19 environment and the new requirements that were coming out. So I'm just going to describe that risk. So it's articulated as if new requirements for digital solutions continue to come in, then staff may need to move away from other deliverables in the plan, resulting in non-delivery of our objectives and ultimately delay in benefits being realised by the service. That risk score has reduced over the last 12 months from 16 to a current risk score of 12. And there has been a lot of work in this area through the IMTP process. So there are a couple of other risks I'm going to come on to, but Michelle, do you want to comment on this one? Because I know you oversee this one in your directorate, and it is one that's been on the register for the last 12 months and beyond.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So I'm Michelle Sell, Director of Planning and Performance, Chief Commercial Officer for Digital Healthcare Wales. So in terms of this resource, as Chris said, this was originally logged as we were supporting health boards and trusts in their response to COVID. And we, colleagues will be aware, we moved quite a lot of resource very quickly to enable us to be able to do that. And that requirement actually carried on for a reasonable length of time. So whilst we weren't in the middle of the pandemic, we have very much been, supporting our health board and trust colleagues through kind of recovery and the actions that they've been taking as a result of that. But that said, as Chris said, we have got now very good control mechanisms, I think, in terms of how we control requirements into our plan, how we assess those as a group. And we've also got, through our stakeholder engagement management, I think we've got good arrangements in place now, both at the detailed planning level with health boards and trusts and at the strategic level. So we have exec to execs meetings, for example. So I do feel that, as Chris said, that we've moved this into a more controlled space. And what I've suggested is we're obviously now well into the planning stage for next year's IMTP, that we just perhaps assess that as we go through this planning phase to assure ourselves that we have got the right mechanisms in place and that we can either reduce this risk further or remove it from the register now on the basis that we are not concerned about its impact as we move forward.
Thanks, Michelle. Chair, do you want me to carry on before
I'm going to just ask people for any comments on that, if you don't mind, Chris, because I think this is a really good summary. And really just wanted to come back and ask Michelle a question on 237, which is, COVID was happily an unforeseen circumstance, which required the system to respond and flex as it did really, really well. And I just wondered, perhaps not an immediate response required, how the exec was thinking about the challenges that the current fiscal environment, shall we say, in terms of public sector funding of the NHS in Wales, whether it was going to have a similar impact, particularly as we've got a number of key programs in the diagnostics portfolio that we're wanting to deliver in this period. And I think you get the sense of what I'm asking. I can see Rydian's put his hand up. Rydian, would you like to comment?
I think I'll try anyway, Rowan. The pandemic brought a change in the decision-making governance associated with rapid response, both in the funding that was made available for everything everywhere and the governance structures around it, particularly, for example, COPE. In the current situation, which is well publicised within the media, there are programmes which are must-haves, and in the diagnostic programmes, you'll be aware that you cannot deliver healthcare services without a LIMS, you cannot deliver it without a PACS. There are some things you can live without, and the prioritisation of those will be determined by some of the new governance structures that have been put in place by Welsh Government, including the Diagnostic Board, for example. We can only deliver the things that are funded, and our IMTP process and our joint executive review processes and our engagement with the finance directors of finance, both in our SLA agreement and our central core funding, allow the executive board, in the full sight of the independent members, to make some difficult decisions based on that information. It's a different environment, completely different environment to the pandemic, as I've been highlighted, and in some ways we're paying back the debt incurred during that period. But I'm confident, and I can assure this committee that the decisions that we make are open, transparent within the governance structures that are provided for us, and are all given very careful consideration regarding the impact on patient care.
Thank you, Rhydian. And I think that's an excellent point in describing the difference, particularly in governance arrangements and funding arrangements in the two scenarios. So thank you for that. David, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on what Rhydian's just said, and I'm sort of forming a view that this risk may have actually served its purpose, and that it can either be removed from this list and maybe managed at a lower level, because I think the new requirements coming in are now likely to be few and far between, given the current situation we're in with public health finances. The main risk to programme delivery is probably around resources, and we've got another risk covering that. So I could probably argue the case for taking this one off the risk register and managing it at a lower level, unless somebody else wants to argue the counter.
I think, David, it's always for the exec to make the ultimate decision, but I think that's an excellent point. Chris, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, only to say, I think the discussion myself, Michelle, and others have had recently around this, we've come to the same conclusion, I think, as David's just described. It feels like the risk has run its course. We're much more explicit now within our IMTP reporting about what is and what isn't funding. I think that's an important development. So we're not, suggesting things are coming in that we'll say yes to. We're saying we're being very transparent about things that come in that we want to do and that will go on to our list of things, desirable things to do, but that we're not funded to be able to deliver. And I think, just checking with Michelle, but I think that was the conclusion that we came to.
Yes, I'm happy with that, Chris, as you say. And in terms of the impacts of the funding position in year and the impacts for next year, I mean, we will be highlighting any impacts in year to the board when we take the performance reports to the board, so that colleagues are aware of that, and we're working through that as a team. And then, as Chris said, next year, even more. We have actually done it this year, so you can see it even on our plan on a page and on the reporting we take through the board about where areas are funded or not funded, or indeed we've highlighted, again, colleagues will see that hopefully in the next board meeting, where the funding position has changed. So either that funding has not become available or we have received funding, so that we've got that kind of oversight, if you like, so you can see where the funding is and what we've been able to do. And I suspect we'll have some robust conversations as we now finalise our plan for next year, because we will have to make some difficult decisions in the financial climate with our wider stakeholders across NHS Wales in terms of where to focus resources for next year, the resources that are available to us.
Excellent. I think that's a really good summary. Chris, do you want to move on? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rowan. So I wanted to start with that one just because it's the one that's been on for the longest, but there are a few other risks that have been on for the last 12 months that we haven't been able to mitigate down. So again, I'm going to bring colleagues in, but I'm just going to describe them. So the first one is 0263 DHCW data functions. And then there's another one. So that's Darren and Ridian might want to comment as well. And then 0296 allergies, adverse reactions, which we had a deep dive on. And in fairness, when this came on, Darren did say it wasn't going to be a quick one to mitigate, but probably worth an update on the position of those two, if that's okay, Darren.
Yeah, that's fine. Chris, Ridian, are you okay if I go ahead and yeah. Thank you. So just to introduce myself, I'm Darren Lloyd. I'm the Associate Director for Information Governance and Patient Safety. Chris, I'll take the functions one first, if that's okay. So the functions risk, the inception of the risk had come from certain challenges we were getting from other administrations about onboarding data that had been created on Welsh residents that had been treated in England. In England provision in England hospitals, basically, but the context of it is much wider. So the reason it's been on the register for some time is it's I suppose its foundations are in the creation of DHCW as a statutory organisation and its functions in order to collect, process, and disseminate information. As a routine day-to-day business as usual function, of course, we process huge amounts of data for the direct care of the patient. This is in the context of some of the aspects that we're doing around what we describe as secondary uses or indirect care, how we manage and we process the data for those things that we do for outcome-based analysis, audit, value in health, research and innovation, those type of things, where the processing and that direct care element has moved away into an indirect care situation. We've got lots of people who are delving into information for the right reasons, of course, for absolutely the correct reasons, but we need a lawful basis for doing that. Now, the functions of the organisation as a statutory organisation as well are there and are set against those things that I described. But in order to assure the board and the committee and obviously the wider organisation, is we have to be doing it within our powers. Intra vares, I think, is the term used. So we have to find a lawful basis for every time we actually process the data under those circumstances. So our functions, whilst we have them, we also have to have another layer of protection in some respects to make sure that we have the air cover to make sure that processing isn't outside of the law. So this risk actually goes much wider in terms of ensuring that when we do process that information, we have the right context by which we're doing that, and we're doing it in a safe, secure, and transparent manner. So it's been on the risk register because some of those mitigations and it's predicated on government being clear about some of those responsibilities for us processing some of the data for those uses previously described, and having that and allowing us to offset certain lawful aspects of common law and confidentiality to make sure that when we are dealing with patient information and identifiable patient information, we're doing it with all of that confidentiality and that privacy aspect in consideration. So that's the context of it. There are lots of conversations currently with the government about how Welsh ministerial support for what we're doing, purpose-driven support for processing information for aspects like value in health, outcomes, audit, those type of things, needs to come so that we have a basis for actually processing that, and it's not in a way that is not in keeping with our responsibilities effectively and everybody else's responsibilities as well. So that's kind of the context of this. We are very much working with government in order to make sure that we are clear about our responsibilities when it comes to processing certain data sets for lots of stakeholders inside and outside of public services.
And Darren, if I'm just to make sure that I'm understanding, there are reasons that you might process data at a national level which would take them outside. It wouldn't be processed within the originating health board, because you're producing a national data set for example, as you said, for outcomes analysis, and therefore you have to be very clear that we are doing that within our powers. I think would that be a good sort of picture for us to think about there?
Yes, I think I'll just come in there, Darren. I think if we use the example of cancer outcomes and the engagement of us benchmarking the cancer performance in Wales with other either home nations or European or indeed beyond, that data is obviously collated and anonymized, aggregated and anonymized in a way that we can understand how well we're performing. So we're doing the right thing the right way to find out if we are truly doing the right thing in the care that we deliver.
And I think that's it, Rydian, that it's all in the ultimate interest of patients that we can assure ourselves of the quality of care that's being delivered. So what would be the time frame, Darren, that you see this being resolved on, or do you see this as an ongoing iterative development that supports the development and maturation of DHCW?
There's a number of actions actually within Welsh Government that continue as we currently speak, to be perfectly honest. Rydian gave a really good example there in terms of our ability to process large amounts of cancer information, because there's regulation around it. There's discrete or very specific regulation about that because of the population health and because of the requirement in order to understand how we actually manage cancer and cancer interventions, those type of things. So there's a very established regulation around that. When we want to do other things as well with other information, then we rely on other lawful basis, other regulation that might be needing to be created, or other mechanisms within government that allows us to do that processing for those other data sets. So what we're working with Welsh Government on is what we can do with primary care data, how we can better use primary care information, and how we can better use secondary care information, but having that use of that data very transparent in a form of a regulation or form of a direction from government effectively.
Yeah, can I just furthermore that? I mean, to try and, because there's a lot of this discussion going on in the media, and patient data is very valuable. It's very valuable to someone like me in the delivery of individual care. The objective is for us to collect, store and share patient information for direct care. That is our primary purpose. Anything outside of that requires a legal basis to add value to the NHS in Wales. This is, to answer your question, this is something that happens in months. It rarely happens in quarters. It quite possibly is a journey of years.
And Rydian, I would just say that doesn't surprise me. That's very normal for those secondary uses of data outside of delivering care. It has immense value to the research community and ultimately benefits patients when it's used in that way, but it's not provided lightly or without everybody, all parties assuring themselves they are compliant with the regulations, and there is extensive regulations in the UK, because as Darren says, we always talk about GDPR, but GDPR is not the only legal obligation within the UK.
Again, for pardon the terminology, for the listener, okay, there are essentially three areas. There's the delivery of direct care that requires the data. That's relatively easy to understand. research innovation, clinical trials, individual consent is collected. So the ability to use that data is given with the explicit permission of the individual for that task. The area that is the tricky area is the indirect care, and that's the journey which probably has the most bumps in the road.
Thank you, Rydian. Alistair, you have had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Rydian. It's clearly such a, and Darren also for outlining this. It's clearly such a sensitive area, and ultimately it will be, I'm sure, for society to make decisions, people within society and their representatives, to make decisions about how information, personal health information will be shared for the improvement of outcomes, potentially of those very, very people. It's a challenging area, and if any of you watched a senior UK government cabinet Secretary of State being interviewed and asked about this a couple of weekends ago, on information being potentially sold, it took the questioner 3 goes before a sort of bit of a response emanated. It's sensitive in every quarter. I just wanted to ask, however, that one of the critical issues, therefore, is about trust and trust in the organisations that serve these outcomes, and that includes us. And there is a very big difference, and I'm sure you'd agree, between being passively transparent in the sense of doing what we're doing as a public record and placing things for the public record. And there's a big difference between that and being actively engaged in transparency, which might move into areas such as consultation and direct engagement with representative groups, those kinds of things. And I just wonder to what extent we've considered the latter in terms of what, listening to Rydian expressing this and your own comments, Chair, that we are assured that we're doing the right thing in order to be able to improve outcomes and ensure that those, the work that is engaged in those outcomes is, as Rydian calls it, the right thing. So that we're convinced about, we're assured about that, but actually we need to bring that wider group with us. So I just really wonder, are we doing enough?
Yeah, I'll come back to you on that.
Are we doing the right thing in terms of engagement? Thanks.
Yeah, so you're referring to the interview that Laura Kuzma did on the weekend. Interesting approach. I'm not going to comment on the strategy employed by NHS England, but we are in the position, we're in a very different position in Wales. The first thing I would say, touching wood, is we haven't made any of the mistakes that England made in the previous discussions with the general public. The second thing to say is there will be a joint decision and it will be led by policy. It won't be a Digital Healthcare Wales decision. Just to reiterate what I said, we collect, we store, we share, and Darren has eloquently outlined the necessity of a legal basis to do it safely and securely. That's why we're not rushing in any direction. Your comment about the passive transparency and let's call it more aggressive engagement and communication, again, will fall out of policy decision, which is in formation and not concluded. So I don't have the ability to inform you at this stage what the conclusion of that is, I'm afraid.
And Darren, you've got your hand up. I'll just say this is globally a fast-moving space, Alistair, and coming out of the pandemic, where data was so critical. seeing the vaccines be approved in a safe but accelerated way, for example. I think people in the regulatory organizations, I'm thinking in Europe, the US, are really considering how to make sure that we basically close the circle between the legal requirements, the system's needs, and the patient's absolutely primary need to feel trust and confidence in their health service. There's nothing more personal than people's health, and it at the end of it has trust. So it is an incredibly important area. Darren, you have had your hand up. Sorry.
Just quickly, Chair, because I know we've talked quite extensively on this. There are two just quick aspects. The one bit of regulation, the control of patient information regulations, are actually being reviewed as we speak, to actually take on some of the lessons learned from the pandemic, and to understand organisations with central responsibilities for processing data in a transparent manner. So we are part of those discussions with Welsh Government, and as Rhyddian said, that Welsh Government policy area, because we are closely linked to England and Wales, because that regulation covers off both administrations. So that is a very recent bit of information, and something that we are very much close to at the moment, to give us more clarity about our responsibilities. And lastly, the fact that we are, it's incumbent on us to sweat the assets of the organisation, and within the functions of the organisation is very much front and centre about our processing responsibilities and our dissemination responsibilities as well. So from that perspective, then it's built in within the foundations of our functions. And we do have a deep dive on this particular risk, actually, in the next risk management group, in order to look at the narrative against this and to see if we need to alter that slightly, given all of these things that are we've spoken about today.
Thank you, Darren. In which case we should perhaps, I was going to say, Rhyddian, just we in that case we should perhaps wait for the deep dive and outcomes of that.
Yeah. I was going to stop the Chair to give you a very quick summary on the other risk that we were about to discuss.
Even better. Let's go to move us on to that.
So adverse allergies and adverse reaction risk, again, is a long-standing risk and will continue to be until everything is visible everywhere the patient goes. The service already holds this risk in a number of places, and a good example would be a patient on multiple medication who has more than one drug chart. Each drug chart has an adverse reactions and allergy entry on the front of the drug chart. Often people put on chart 2, see chart 1, right? So there's inherent risk in the system, and what some people think is an allergy to others is an adverse reaction. And there is a difference between things that you can that patients might be exposed to that kill them or seriously harm them, as opposed to things that might give them a dodgy tummy. And those things often that give a dodgy tummy can save lives of those individuals. So these risks are everywhere there is paper. The infrastructure provision that we provided within the Welsh Clinical Portal has over 35,000 users across various healthcare sectors, is starting to deliver a single source of the truth. When we combine that with the Medicines Transformation Programme, where one of those work streams is the shared medicines element, we start to have a mechanism to join up all these places where allergies and adverse reactions are recorded. And also, again, going back to what I said earlier, to collect, to store, and to share. I think that's going to be a theme today.
Yes, and Rhyddian, just to hammer it home, and to process for the interest and benefit of the patient, because once you have that data in a centralized place, you can operate across it to make sure that people aren't unintentionally exposed to a greater risk than they need to be for their ultimate benefit. So to your point that occasionally, you might have a small upset stomach, but you'll trade that for recovery from a life-threatening condition. So yes, thank you.
So I imagine that risk is going to stay there for a long time.
Yeah.
And so it should, in my opinion.
Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, So 2 others I just want to touch on. I'm conscious of time, but I just think it's important for the committee just to note the ones that have been on for 12 months. So 0269, the switching service data warehouse. I'm not proposing we discuss that today, but again, just want to give some assurance that that will transfer to the new committee, having had the conversation with Evan Evans, the exec lead for that risk now. And I know David in particular has had a few discussions about this. So it is on the agenda and radar for that new committee, and it moves over in the context of having been on for 12 months. So a timeline for when that's mitigated continues to be the priority, I think. The last
And
one,
Chris, if I remember correctly, that's tied to the delivery of the NDR, right? The two things are tied. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. So it's a timeline from the NDR as to when that will be addressed. That's the action, and that's what we'll take through the new committee. 0292, capacity within the infrastructure team. Carwyn or Sam, do you want to just comment on this one? I think this is close to being mitigated, but again, you're closer and you might want to just comment on this one. Carwyn?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up. So I'm Carwyn, Director of ICT and Digital Business. Yeah, this was when the plan was produced that we didn't have sufficient capacity to be able to service all of the work in the plan. So the risk was raised. We were seeking also funding to carry out a couple of things. One in particular was the Data Centre 2 project. Now we've had confirmation from Welsh Government that we are not going to get the money around the Data Centre 2 projects. However, our finance team are able to cover that internally from various slippages in this current financial year. So we're recommending that will get closed at our kind of next review, or downgraded anyway to the directorate level at our next review within the Ops Directorate senior leadership team meeting. And we've also retitled it as well. I'm just trying to find the name here now. But basically, it's a high number of unfunded posts in the team is the new title of it, instead of that, because we do have a lot of unfunded posts in various places, and that was adding to the pressure. So, but that's not unique to that team now.
Sam, can I ask you to comment?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to add to what Carwyn was saying, which is that we do, as he's rightly identified, have quite a high number of unfunded roles in operations, and that's for a variety of reasons, due to us proceeding with some work at risk, some program funding drying up, and so on. But we're working through netting those roles off against vacancies at the moment as part of our wider kind of organisational change programme, which is aligning the Ops Directorate resources around the capabilities that we need for the future. So we are sort of looking strategically at how to resolve this and make sure that we're evolving the Ops Directorate workforce in the right direction.
Yes, and Sam, I believe you are currently advertising for some key roles. If you would just like to remind anyone listening where they might find them online.
So we currently have 2 roles which are advertised on the DHCW website and on NHS Jobs, which is the Associate Director of Digital Delivery and the Chief DevOps Officer, both of which are key roles in our new senior leadership team structure. I'm very keen to have applications from people who would like to come and work for us.
Yes, and voted the best place to work in IT in the UK, if
Absolutely.
I recall correctly. So we would welcome applications.
More than once, Chair.
Exactly. So we would like the talent who would add to make sure that if we when we win it again, I think 3 times they should allow us to keep the trophy, but it's a good standard to aim for. So thank you for that point, Rydian. Okay, that I think covers those risks off, and I think we can all understand why those have been on the register for more than 12 months. Chris, do you want to take us through the end of this presentation
will.
an eye on the clock. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you for colleagues for their input on that one. Just a couple of final slides. The movement in risks in terms of the start and the end of the year. But the key thing to note here, I think, is the number of risks fairly consistent that the Digital Governance and Safety Committee has overseen over the last 12 months. Just noting that point, 7 will now transfer to the new committee, so there'll be a much more even balance between the 3 main committees of the board overseeing risks moving forward. Not unexpectedly, the majority of the risks over the last 12 months relate to service delivery or finance, those 2 domains, and that's been reflected in the risks that have come onto the corporate risk register. And just finally, the majority again risks in strategic missions 1 and 2 being the highest number. And just to recap, so that's a lot of the infrastructure, information governance, cyber, and delivery of live services, so service delivery. So I think no surprises in that, but it's a good reminder of where the risks have come from and gone on to over the past 12 months. Chair, I'm conscious of the time. That was the presentation. Thank you for allowing the time to get into some of that discussions around those risks that have been on for a while. I'll just ask the committee to note the current position in terms of the risks that have come on to the risk register, the movement in risks, and those that have been removed since our last committee meeting. But I was keen just to make sure we had the opportunity to review those. So happy to take questions, but I'll stop there, Chair.
So Chris, thank you for that. I can see David's got his hand up for one, and I'll just comment very briefly and say I think the 12-month analysis is a really good exercise, because when we established the committee many years ago, it feels like many years ago, under the previous chair's leadership, I think we had a number of risks that were sort of tolerated rather than being managed. And now I think you should all have a measure of satisfaction to see that they are being actively managed. So I just want to say that I've noticed that. David, a question, please.
Firstly, I'd like to endorse the comments you just made, Rowan. I think this is really useful analysis. I think there are 2 things which might add to it, but I don't know. It depends what the outcome looks like. So on balance, what we've got is sort of roughly the same number of risks being moved off as being added, which looks like, it's an even position. But I just wondered if we aggregated the risk score for all of the ones that were removed and got a total, and did the same for the new ones, whether the balance of risk is any different. And if it is, I think that would be interesting. If it's not, then it's probably not of interest. And the other point, which might be of insightful, is of the risks that haven't moved in the last 12 months, i.e. they're still on the register, what was the cumulative risk score 12 months ago, and what is it today? And have we succeeded in sort of, we haven't got them off yet, but we've at least reduced the overall impact of that. So, Chris, if it's not too much trouble, the next time we do this, if you could think about adding those, I think that would be really useful. And then the only other thing was, in the previous report, it mentions 2 new risks. They weren't in the pack, so I'm assuming that those are going to get picked up in the committee meeting next week. Is that correct?
Yeah, and there has been 2 risks that have come on and come off in the time since our last meeting, so it might be those, David.
Okay.
Was, yeah, we've had a couple of queries on those, but there are a number also that are moving to the new committee meeting next week. If you let me know the reference number, I can confirm.
It's 326 and 327. The NHS Wales Act funding and the NDR delays.
Yeah, they're both on the new committee. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Great. Thanks.
And thanks for the feedback, David. We'll have a look at that work and come back on that.
Okay.
Excellent. So I'm now going to move on and ask for the finalist at the recent Professional Service Management Awards, ITSM 23, to lead us through the Instant Review and Organisational Learning Report. So Keith, can I say congratulations on that?
Thank you. The awards are next month, so we're I'll be going there, find out if I won.
In the meantime, colleagues, vote early, vote often. That's what we say.
I think so. I think the decision has been made, but they haven't said anything. So, okay. So thank you. So I'm Keith Reeves. I'm Service Management Team Manager, but also the author of the Incident Review and Learning Group quarterly report. So this is just a run through of the report. There's been a few new additions into the report, so I'll probably focus more on those as we work through. But the report is to cover the Q2 period, and it covers 4 areas. So again, as with previous reports, it's broken down into an area on reporting, on reviewing, on learning, and improving. So some of these I will skip through because there's very little to say. So around the reporting element, we had one national reportable incident, which was issued to Welsh Government. That was done within timescale. And then moving into the review section, we are slightly down on the previous quarter, but what we're now finding throughout the group is that the reports that we're getting through and the reviews that we're getting through, they're now more in depth because of some of the improvements that we've put in place, but also the complexity of the incidents that we review are increasing. I think in the early days we were sort of pushing through quite a few high number of reports. But now, as the systems become more complex, actually getting to the root cause and identifying the contributory factors is adding to that complexity. So it's quite interesting to see, but it does mean that throughput into the group has slightly decreased this month or this quarter. I think the key things for the report, though, are where we've put the contributory factors framework in place. So I know that I've spoken at previous meetings on this, but for others' benefit, the contributory factors framework is a tool that was used within a clinical setting to identify key areas of learning, and we've adapted this for a digital environment. It sits quite nicely to be able to then break down into individual domains and then areas within those domains to actually find where the factors are that are causing some of these incidents. And what you'll notice from the report is that there are 2 main areas where we have a high number of contributory factors in that, and they're primarily what we call the departmental domain, which is around the infrastructure, the applications, and the interfaces. And as the systems become more complex and the way that we develop them is becoming more complex, then this is where we start to identify things like software bugs, or where we've had failures within the infrastructure world, and to resolve those, it does take a little bit more investigation. The other area that we've seen a significant increase in is actually in the external domain. So this is where we have either applications which are hosted within individual health boards. So we don't have the ability to manage the local health board's infrastructure or the network connections. And so where there's a failure locally, we then get an incident reported within DHCW, where we spend time investigating to then go back to the health board and go, actually, it's the areas within your network. And then it's down to their local IT to be able to resolve that. The other areas around where we've got third-party suppliers and systems that are hosted or provided by those suppliers, where there is an incident in that in their domain. And so there's a couple of improvements that we've started to identify in last month where we're looking to put some improvements in place. So of the improvements, because I go through the improvements every quarter, I think of the improvements, some of these we're now starting to see the benefit of putting the improvement in place. So when I go through one of the lessons learned reports that we picked up on at the last month, what we've identified is that actually the improvements we've put in place with the major incident management process has meant that we were able to manage the incident itself in a more controlled manner. And so some of the good practice that we're picking up, we've been able to relate back to the improvement work that we've put in place. The other one to note is around the change management process. So in previous improvements that we put in place last year were around running an audit of the process itself and seeing what recommendations can be put in place, what we can do to improve. What we have noticed is that there has been an increase in the change-related incidents, so incidents caused by change management. So what we've agreed is to run, again, a re-audit of that process and initially start off at a high level and then allow the auditor to basically follow the breadcrumb trail, find out and actually do a deep dive audit into individual areas. One of the findings, though, we found, or one of the key areas that we found, though, is actually around where we put a change in place. When you start to assess the change before implementation, it's identifying what the impact is going to be of doing that change versus not doing that change. And so there's one of the findings we are looking to put into place is around developing guidance and developing further training around how to run impact assessments. And also then start to invest, or again, as part of that audit, do a deep dive and see for, and actually start to look at and question some of those impact assessments. The two new ones that we've put in place, these are improvements around those external domains. So one of them is that we've got a service accounts management function, and as part of that, they meet with the health boards on a quarterly basis to run through all of the services that DHCW provides, but also to then raise with them any issues that may transpire. And as part of that, we are looking at how we can provide reporting and actually get the health boards to provide reporting around those locally caused incidents. So we've got, for the remainder of the financial year, some planned activities around actually identifying the scope and the scale, also to raise awareness of the responsibilities that we have within the service level agreements that we've got in place with the health boards, and then to start to raise awareness of those local incidents. So we'll do that through the SLA and the engagement meetings that we hold, but also we're bringing that into the National Service Management Board as part of the governance structure for individual services. The second new improvement is around pretty much the same thing, but on the supplier side. So working with commercial services, working with contract managers to start to investigate the supplier caused incidents and how we manage that according to the individual contracts. And again, it's identifying the scope, it's identifying the scale, it's looking at the contractual provisions, and also looking at where the suppliers can be putting in improvements along the way. And then the last part of the report, and this is something new that we brought in at request from the last meeting. So this was start to do a bit of a highlight of picking some of the reviews that we do, and then picking out some of the lessons that we've identified. So I know in previous meetings we've talked about the MPI, that we had an incident around the MPI where work was carried out to address an issue relating to potential data quality issues. We've undertaken an internal review of that, and I know that there's also an external review of that incident also taking place. But from the internal review, we've identified some of the findings. I've included those into the report here. So it's things like good practice, it's things around the improvements around the management of the incident, around communications, around coordination of the health board response as well as the DHCW response. It's putting into place individual single points of contact so that the messages that are being relayed back don't become confusing, that you don't have one area which is being told something which is counter to what another area is being told. And also then the use of the technology, because of the nature of things like Teams and some of the applications that are available through Teams, it's enabled us to actually make use of the technology to organize and update and provide information quicker and easier. And it then gives us a chance to collaborate much better with the individual health boards. Some of the areas where we do need to improve, I've already mentioned the change management process. This was a key contributory factor within the MPI incident. So this is part of where the audit is coming from, but also looking at the training that's been made available, the things, again, going back to the impact assessments, how they're being undertaken. Also, I think some of the findings have been more around the end-to-end product knowledge. So there's been a significant turnover of staff, and the risk with having a significant turnover of staff is that the knowledge and the information held and people's awareness of the individual systems, what they link to, how the data is fed, can be lost if it hasn't been documented or that information hasn't been passed on. You're almost into a world of Chinese whispers, in which case we need to do some work around that, around how we capture that. And then the last part is around the contract management side. So again, it links back to the new improvement around supplier management and how we manage our suppliers, how we manage the contracts, and how between us we can improve those processes. So I think that's pretty much what I want to cover off, unless Michelle or Sam, if you want to come in, talk a little bit more about the MPI one, or anything else in the report.
Sam, would you like to add something?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Keith, for the report. Just to add to the reference that Keith made there to the external review of the EMPI incident that we've done. So we have brought in an external consultancy to do a review for us, and they've augmented a lot of the findings in our internal review and come up with some additional as well. So it's been a really useful exercise, and we've come out of it with a series of both tactical and strategic recommendations that we can start to implement, and they're really in the areas of major incident management, supplier and contracts management, and making sure we're getting the right level of support from suppliers of critical pieces of our underpinning infrastructure and architecture, skills and knowledge transfer, observability of system uptime and performance in real time, and being able to react to those, react to any incidents as they occur, and not being notified through the service desk or through through our customers, but actually being able to see that stuff proactively. So there's a number of findings which have come out of that. We're in the process of building those into an action plan, and where appropriate, we'll be taking those forward into the broader kind of strategic organizational change and operating model work that I referenced earlier, just to make sure that we're embedding anything that needs to be taken forward in that way.
Thank you, Sam. That's really helpful. David?
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Keith. Really good report. Lots of good stuff going on, so thank you for that. I just wanted to clarify the point you made about staff turnover and knowledge retention. Is that a general observation that spans the organisation, or was it specific to particular areas of the business?
It's a general observation.
Okay.
So whilst we're recruiting a lot of new staff, again through general movement, the handover processes won't necessarily take. I mean, if you have somebody retiring, they're going to have years of knowledge of how the organisation works, how the systems work, and it's how, as an organisation, can we work on that to actually capture that knowledge. And it's sort of a key service management area around knowledge management, that if it's not documented, then it's very, very difficult to get that out of people's heads.
Yeah.
Marilyn, who popped up on my
Sorry.
feed in my social media this week, talking about the Black History Month and sort of Black History heroes. So that was lovely to see, Marilyn. Anyway, your point.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for that. Just following up from really what David was saying, I was going to ask about the staff piece really, and I think thank you for a really good detailed report, Keith. But I think you've really partly answered it to say about I was saying exactly what you were going to say. How do we try to retain all that wonderful knowledge that we have from people who've been in the organisation for a long time? Because that oral piece that we have, that qualitative piece around pulling that information down for system-based information is invaluable, really. But I'm just wondering, is there any carrot that we can dangle to people in which to encourage them to give us that? I mean, I'm just throwing that out there, really.
I think it's one of those things that it's not unique to DHCW. So it's also wider. It's industry wider, and I think part of it is the ongoing sort of professional skills element of ensuring, and part of it is around competency. So ensuring that your staff know what they're doing, ensuring they know where systems link to. I think the system linkage bit is very, very key to all of this. And as I say, it's not just a DHCW level issue, because I know other areas wider than within healthcare. There's a lot of discussion again of how do we retain that. I think there's potential through things like the standards that we run. So I know that ISO 20000, the service management standard, there's a piece in there around knowledge management and how we capture that. On the service desk should be the front door for any organisation. So their level of knowledge of and understanding and the documentation they have available, it's going to be key. And with the DHCW one, with the Service Desk Institute, their SDI 3-star, they're working towards their 4-star SDI. Part of that is going to be about knowledge management, knowledge retention. So again, it's something I think is being picked up, but I think it's one of those. It's probably going to take time to actually have a proper knowledge management system in place to then be able to capture it appropriately.
And Keith, thank you, Marilyn. And Keith, can I just comment how critical that is? So just very quickly, working or seeing the building of one of the experiments at the Large Hadron Collider, which was a over 20-year project, building, a one-off machine. Everything on it was the first time it was ever built, and it was built through teams of people who were PhDs, visiting scientists coming in for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and actually the most remarkable thing was how it was documented. And it is a cultural piece that you have to embed across the organization, that this stuff is mission critical and important, because nobody likes writing documentation, right? Right, but you have to make it easier, and that there are tools out there. So I'm looking forward to seeing us develop on that front. And the other thing I would say, Keith, that I really enjoyed hearing about was we're now recognizing our systems flow across the systems and working at the interfaces to identify non-standard features, shall we say, of implementations that are done in health boards that might just cause a bump when we do system updates. I think that's really powerful. So thank you for that, Keith. I'm going to move on.
Sorry, Ryan. I think,
Sorry.
I think the last one for me is also around the knowledge management. Is things like medical device regulations, things about duty of quality, duty of quality. It's going to be key that we know how these systems all link together, and that's probably going to be the biggest struggle that we might have initially. We'll get there.
We will, and it becomes an increasing just a requirement of being able to operate as we have greater integration across more componentized based architectures and systems. So absolutely, thank you for that, Keith. I wish you well next month. I hope to see pictures of you clutching an award coming to my email very soon. So I'm going to move on to assurance reports. I'm doing a lousy job of telling the time. Darren, could you start with the information governance assurance report, please?
Yeah,
I'm
certainly.
pleased to remember that we have all read these documents. So.
Of course, yeah. So I'll be very brief. So there's just some matters of note. We're on the agenda to discuss the strategy collectively as part of the clinical directorate. Just to spotlight the fact that part of our Wales Accord for Sharing Personal Information team are themselves up for an award. Making some observations, I think, in terms of DHCW and its overall kind of profile, is it tends to settle in with some really large players in tech services. I mean, it feels a bit like David and Goliath sometimes in terms of the fact that DHCW is there nestled across some of those really large players in the services. So the team are there, so recognising the fact that what we've done in order to create what is a component part of the IG framework within Wales. So I'm really pleased with that, and the guys have worked really, really hard to get to that position. And it's predicated on the fact that we want to take WASPI forward in a different form as well as part of a code for the ICO. So it's, from our perspective, it's really good timing that everybody else is recognising the fact of the importance of this, and we need that to be recognised across the board and within public services, etc. There's a little bit in the private part of our discussion as well about a recent GDPR audit, internal audits, but we'll discuss that at the time. Also some assurance to the committee as well about our freedom of information handling. And on the recent events that we've had, there's been high profile public issues around disclosure of information inappropriately in the public domain because of FOI requests as a result of that. So to give the committee some assurance that we do have FOI handling processes, and we are very robust on how we do those things. Just some other information in terms of the information about the number of data protection impact assessments that we've been working on as well recently over the last quarter. Again, very high volume, and just belays the fact of how much work we're actually pushing out into our services on the amount of IT improvements that we're making. And then some follow-up actions as well around our IG toolkit and the assessments and some follow-up actions that we've committed to make sure that we continually, from a corporate perspective and part of our corporate responsibility, making sure that we are as compliant as we can be in all of those areas, basically. So I wasn't going to pick on anything more in terms of any of the detail unless any of the committee members had any specific questions.
No, Darren, but I think you make an excellent point around IG and privacy. So if I looked at in your report, Vodafone, Post Office, M&S, Wells Fargo, HSBC, high street brands on the information governance side of things, and people trust their banks to look after their information. So that's excellent. And then on the privacy side of things, well, you've really got some absolute luminaries on that particular award. I wish you well. David, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I'd second what you've just said, Ryan. Thanks for reading up the list of the big players we're up against. I would concur it's David against Goliath, but David did proceed. So good luck. Just point of clarification, Darren. I was looking through all the data protection impact assessments that have been signed off. Quite a few of them were related to the dashboards that we're doing as part of Value for Health thing. When we're doing the assessment, do we take into account that the fact that the dashboard is basically dynamic and will change over a period of time as new data comes in? Do we do a snapshot, say, yeah, we've done all the checks now, but given that the data that's underpinning the dashboard will evolve, is there a need to check back in at some point just to make sure that the what's being presented is still safe?
Really good question, David. There's a number of different ways that we assure that. One is that our baseline in terms of how we actually go through the DPIA is especially when it comes to dashboards, is we understand what the access control model is around those dashboards under those circumstances. What is the baseline control of information being presented? That's number one. And number two, as well, then, is understanding where there's a review process required. So sometimes those dashboards will naturally come through our assurance process for one reason or another, or we will have an additional review process where we may go back through those DPIAs because something has changed and we need to understand the dynamic nature of those particular services. So there's a number of ways that we can actually capture that.
Great, I'm reassured. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to move on now, Paul, to Paul Evans, and ask for the informatics assurance report to be presented. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Just to carry on the theme of awards nominations, just wanted to mention the quality team have also been nominated for the NHS Wales Awards. So the final announcement for that are on the 15th of November. And I will keep my WIAG report brief in the interest of time. It's been quite a busy period for WIAG. There's been a total of 20 papers reviewed during Q2. As is usual with the WIAG report, there's been lots of movement on the individual papers since the time this report was actually submitted for the committee. So most papers highlighted in the report are now going through the final approval stages with the quality team and then passing on to Rydian as medical director for sign-off. There's just two papers I wanted to draw attention to. The first are 2.3, which we now have a go-live date for, the 28th of November, and we're confident that the WIAG process will be completed in plenty of time for that. And the second one is around the shared medicines API. There's been a delay caused in part by approval of the overarching API management safety case. And I've met with Ian Williams this morning to outline the outstanding pieces of assurance that are required. And Ian's going away to look into that. It's primarily around testing of the overarching API management platform. And once that testing evidence has been approved, then shared medicines API work. Forward planning, we're actually looking at an even busier period during Q3. We've received 8 papers and 3 show and tells so far, and already have a further 13 papers booked in for the remainder of Q3, with more expected towards the end of the quarter. And as far as development is concerned, we're continuing to work with colleagues from the Centre of Excellence on a work package around modernising the entire WIAG process using the Power Platform. Provided a demo to WIAG assurance leads last Monday, which was really well received, and we have a demo next week with a group of project managers to look at it from their perspective. But we're quite excited by the work actually, and it should radically change the way the WIAG process works and the way that evidence is requested and submitted. So I'll continue to update this committee as that work progresses.
And Paul, what's the benefit of doing that? Is that so that you can sort of incrementally build the evidence across different areas and have a timestamp and auditable approval process?
In part, Chair, yes, but one of the main advantages, though, the current WIAG process, as I'm sure everyone's aware, is a 2-step process where a project manager will submit an assurance quality plan. Assurance leads will then inform the project what the individual requirements are. The project manager can then go away and work on those 20 assurance work streams and then come back with a safety case and readiness report, but once they have the evidence that they've met those assurance requirements. But that whole process hangs on all 20 assurance leads submitting what they want, before the project manager can go away and work on it. The way the Power Platform will work is individual assurance leads can submit their requirements, and the project manager is able to see what those are and go away and gather the evidence for them. So it becomes a holistic one-step process rather than having to wait for one paper to be completed before they can start work on a second one. So I'm hopeful that overall it'll dramatically speed up the WIAD process.
David?
Thanks, Rowan. Thanks for the report, Paul. Really good read. I just wanted, you mentioned the issue with the shared medicines record API and a problem with the API management platform. Could you just expand on that one a little bit, just to explain what the problem is and whether it's the likely impact?
Yeah, certainly, David. So for the overarching API management platform, Jeff Norton has requested a number of pieces of testing evidence and reports. He hasn't received all of those yet, and his approval of the shared management API, the shared medicines API, is contingent on approval of the overarching API management platform. So Ian is going away to help facilitate getting that evidence together for Jeff, so we can get both people signed off.
Okay, so there's no underlying technical problem. It's just a sign-off process. Yeah.
It is.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. All right, lovely. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you, Paul, for just expanding on the benefits of going to the Power Platform. That was really useful. Ridian, can I ask you to take us through the Information Services Assurance Report and any awards that you are you should be getting?
Well,
why aren't they
thank you, Chair.
nominating you, Ridian?
Just to highlight that my directorate, the clinical directorate, wins more awards than any other directorate in the organisation. Just putting it out there. Right, I'll take you briefly through this information service report. I'll take you straight to the assurance report, straight to section 4, to the things to highlight. The strategy is later in the agenda, so I'll skip over that. The ISD Assurance Group have been very hard at work in the time period since August 23, and there's some of the work that they've been doing. We've been successful in the annual Digital Economy Act accreditation review, which is a bit of a mouthful, but that's related to the value that we add within Wales through our contribution to SAIL. We've been involved in successful testing of the very important part of keeping our data backups safe and the ability to move from data center to data center. So that's an important part of the program, and we've had approval of the Power BI assurance framework, and this relates to presentations that are visible to the public on the data that we collect. A short report and a short summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Ridian. Does anyone have any questions for Ridian? No challenges of whether clinical wins more awards than anyone else, David?
Well, I think the challenge is out there now to Sam and other colleagues in the organisation to try and match Ridian. Ridian, just a quick question: if my memory serves me correctly, the NDR analytics platform should now be live. So I just wanted to ask the question: have the R&I team started to use that in anger?
Yes, it is live. The health boards have been given their segment of it, as for want of a better terminology. We're in the process of collecting, David, and therefore pouring the data in.
Okay.
Simplistic terms.
Okay. When would you envisage just starting to actually do some data science type projects on it?
Yeah, when the data sets for the particular thing of interest are completed. Okay. Sorry, that's very vague, David.
It is. I could ask a follow-up question there, but I'll save it for later, don't worry.
Yeah, my position as medical director is to provide assurance that the data is used correctly. It is. I don't have the knowledge base regarding the detail of the NDR program and its progress, other than what I've informed you. The data sets.
Yeah.
So to give you an example, David, the cancer data set is dependent on the collection of all the data relating to that particular cancer. One can't deliver the value out of the NDR analytics on that data set until all the data has been collected. So the fact that it's just been switched on live, it needs to be filled up.
Okay, so the reason I asked the question is to share a lesson learned from my experience elsewhere, which was loading the data is a big time-consuming undertaking and can span literally years. And one of the challenges you've got with this type of program is starting to deliver some quick wins and some early value. And the only way you can do that is if you sort of prioritize the loading of the data set based on some things that you think you'll be able to use to deliver some value. So you come at it from these are the projects I want to run. This is the subset of the data that I need, and then you sort of prioritize the onboarding of data around the things you're going to want to use first. So if you do that, you get to the point where you can do meaningful work at an earlier stage than if it's just sort of moving it over in complete data sets.
I'd agree. I mean, and the NDR program board are there to work with stakeholders as to what those priorities should be.
Okay.
I think David, it might be a question to ask next week at our new shiny board.
Yeah.
But I think it's an excellent question. Ridian, can I ask you to do the R&I strategy as well?
Yes, one of the disadvantages of having the meeting at half term is that most of the people who have done the hard work aren't here to take the glory. But I will attempt to give Rachel paper its just coverage. So if we take section 3 of the paper, dividing into resourcing, governance, and engagement, and then to 4 regarding progress that's been made in those 3 areas, and in find, recruit, and follow up. So it's pretty self-explanatory. As you said earlier, people have read the paper. I'm happy to take questions on it. You can see that the governance structure for our reporting has improved, and we're making progress there. We've had our first R&I board, as you'd expect in the first meeting, setting out sort of terms of reference and what it is we're here to do and how to do it. A lot of engagement, as you can see. That's a very much an important part of explaining to people the capability and the facilities that Digital Healthcare Wales provide to the wider NHS. So that's a positive. The find, recruit, and follow up service, sort of the aims and objectives, the scoping of the project, and the 4 work streams, data, governance, engagement, and delivery. So that is progressing. There have been some work regarding judging panels, and again engaging with things like the Bevan exemplar. So there's some stuff that we do, and then probably the bit that excited you, Rowan, is where are we with some very interesting research programs, the multi-cancer blood test, and you can see that there are some eminent associations being made there. Type 2 diabetes, the Ascend Plus, in a particular cohort of patients with cardiovascular disease and diabetes, and then the non-solid cancers, so the blood cancers. So you can see that the team they're working hard, which is what we were expecting them to do, and hopefully they're adding value.
Ridian, I was excited at 2 levels to read the report. One, because I think the standard of the report is much tighter, and I was really pleased to see that development as the functions kind of maturing in terms of our reporting into this committee. And yes, it was very pleasing to read about the liquid biopsy trial and some of those other trials. So good to see us working and influencing internationally. David?
Yeah, I share your comments about the report, Rowan. Thanks, Viridian, for relaying that to us. I just have one question regarding resources. There are a couple of posts, one new post, one a temporary converted into a permanent ask as part of the scaling up around this. I was frankly expecting to see a little bit more than that. Have we being constrained by budget at the moment in terms of how quickly we want to build capability in R&I?
David, you'll be aware that the wider NHS resource constraints and debt and mechanisms of reducing costs, for want of a better word, delivering cost savings, means that there is a period of perhaps more intense scrutiny on positions across the wider NHS. We've, at executive directors and management board, take our commitment to this cost saving process extremely seriously, but we're also cognizant of the fact that we must have people in positions to do the things that we are expected to deliver. So we will increase our capacity within the constraints that we're currently experiencing. We, in terms of Rachel's division, and this will come back at a future meeting, the ability to generate income from the work that we do for others will allow us to increase that capacity at a faster pace than previously, David. So I'll update you when I've got it.
Okay, thanks, Richard.
Okay, we are late, but if I could just ask that we come back at 2:45, and then we will try and complete the other two items for, well, I think it'll probably be 3:15 by the time we get through it. So if I can see you back at 2:45, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. So I believe we're all back. Thank you everyone for coming back on time. Two items to cover, and I want they're both important. The first one, the intellectual property policy. Thank you, Michelle, for bringing this back. It's been a developing document and slightly interrupted by the Welsh National IP policy. And this has now been redrafted to be consistent with that national policy. Michelle, I think it's important to say. So I think we've had a chance to read the information. So Michelle, do you want to just outline the policy, and we can then discuss before approving?
Thank you, Rowan. Yes, you see, I'll keep this brief and we can take questions if colleagues have questions. Hopefully you've had a chance to read it. So as Rowan said, I think this has been developed in the context of the wider national framework and the work that's been done, led by Welsh Government. As a public sector body and as a digital body, two slightly different drivers, I think it's important that we have a clear understanding about our position on intellectual property, and that those who work within our organisation have an appropriate level of understanding. And also there are the principles under which we operate, I guess, under those guises. And in section 3, there's got a nice little summary there of the principles that we've used to develop this policy. And fundamentally, as I say, I think it is about our core purpose, so delivering support for health and care. We're not a commercial organisation, but we need to be clearly mindful of the way in which we develop, we manage and we use intellectual property rights. So that's what we've tried to do in the policy. We've tried to set that out really clearly. And I should say that subject to the approval of this policy by the organisation, we'll be developing some training materials so we can perhaps produce a simple or a simpler guide that we can share with all of our staff, so that they've got that level of understanding, and then can reach out if they need any further help or advice. So the policy was developed by a working group that we put together. We brought in some external support to support us with that, and they also interviewed a number of key stakeholders really to get the right perspective. The plan is going forward that the lead, if you like, for intellectual property will sit with our with respect to the medical director, multi-award-winning commercial services team, I think I could test you on numbers there. Nominated in the Go Procurement Awards next week, shortlisted again. But commercial services will pick up the lead on IP, because generally this fits within a contractual framework, obviously working closely with other teams, key teams such as the R&I team, and they will be developing the register and be the initial point of contact for any queries or engagement from a contractual basis. So that's kind of my introduction, Rowan, but happy to take any questions from colleagues.
You're on mute, Rowan.
Well, I was being very kind there. I was saying thank you, Michelle, and congratulations on being nominated again. With that, David, do you have a question?
No, just a well done, Michelle. It's been a little bit of a journey to get us to where we did. Read through the policy, it looks perfectly sensible and rational to me. So well done. Don't really have any questions to ask. Thanks.
Thank you, David.
If there are no other questions, Michelle, I thought it was a really good policy. I had the opportunity to read an early draft and the final one, and I think it's excellent, and we can review it with the benefit of experience on the cycle of reviews. So well done on that, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to the clinical strategies piece, which is before I do that, formally. Can we approve the policy? Any objection? No. Can we minute then, Julie, that the policy was approved? Thank you. Clinical strategies. So we're going to review 3 clinical strategies in the clinical directorate business areas and the recommendations with them. The 3 strategies are here today really to be endorsed. And Ridian's going to present, supported by Stephanie Harris and Darren Lloyd. So, Ridian, do you want to coordinate this section? And we look forward to having the presentations.
Okay, thank you, Chair. There's a fair bit in this. It's quite chunky. And
Ridian, take your time. It's important. So,
okay.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is, I won't take much time. Because I'm going to hand it over to the people who've done the real work. My senior leadership team are absolute stars, 2 of whom are here today. The purpose behind this is that it's important people understand what we deliver within the clinical directorate and how they can engage with us and what value that we can add. For those who don't know, my directorate is divided into 3: the information and analytics strategy is Appendix 1 for your perusal, clinical informatics and business change, which is Appendix 2, and information governance strategy, Appendix 3. All of these strategies have fallen out of quite extensive stakeholder engagement, and the work has been quite agile in its development in terms of draft revision as we've engaged. Section 4 highlights the vision. So this fits with the organizational structure, driving value from data, inspiring and empowering our partners, putting people at the heart of our digital services, and of course the very important part of leading information governance compliance in the way that we collect, store and share. The aims, there's some symmetry, as you can see. So the 3 authors essentially have worked closely together, and you'll see that there's a common branding, a common theme, and I've got to say I'm very impressed with what they have done. So what I think would be a benefit is to give them the opportunity to just give you the highlights of each of their strategies. And we'll go in reverse order for a change, and I'll put Mr. Lloyd in the spotlight first.
Thanks, Ridian. Yeah, just to I suppose to spotlight some of the elements on there. We wanted to come from a position where we had a balance of our ambitions, our responsibilities, and some where we felt where our priorities were across the clinical directorate, I suppose, in terms of all of those three areas. Certainly from an IG perspective, I think I wanted to make sure that we had a strategy that we knew in most part we could deliver. I didn't want to be in a position where it was one of those things that sat on a shelf and gathered dust and never saw the light of day again once it were improved. Because this is the stepping point really in terms of how we inform and engage with our IMTP process moving forward. You know, we have a plan, we have a strategy, we want to build on plans across that strategy so that we can assure the organisation and assure our stakeholders that we've got the right approach. Hence why we've asked questions of our stakeholders as to whether we've got the right balance on all of those priorities and all of those things that we've recognised as important as part of the framework. Because at the end of the day, we are forward and we are outward delivering on some of those key components, and it's I think it's our responsibility as an organisation and as individuals as well to try and lead in some of these areas so that we've got a firm foundation for the governance arrangements that we are definitely dependent on when it comes to our aspects like information sharing and all those things that are actually within the strategy and detailed. I won't pretend that some of these aspects that we've highlighted and spotlighted as important are going to come in a time where priorities are important and resource is very tight. So innovation in terms of trying to deliver some of these is really important. I think we've always looked upon like that because it's always a difficult thing to sell, I think. And I think we've said in previous committees, and Rowan, as you said yourself, in terms of the fact that selling some of these things are almost a very difficult thing to do because they're not necessarily seen as the top 10 of importance in organizations when it comes to risk and it comes to the balance of dealing with day-to-day ambitions of and service delivery of patient-facing organizations. So it's for us to lead on some of this stuff because both Riddy and I and colleagues see the importance of this. We want to get more information in front of more health professionals and in front of patients as well. So to get the governance arrangement set and the IG elements as a baseline is really important to all of that transition. So, you know, we're in mission 1 to provide digital transformation. And one of the portfolios is to protect that information as well at the same time. So we're continually looking at the balance in that strategy. So this is the kickoff point. You know, we want to use this in order to make sure that we progress the areas we've already established because we've come a long way. We're certainly not starting from a position of zero here. We want to increase our capability in some of these areas and our offering to the organisations across public services and what we deliver as part of the framework. So it's relatively short as a strategy, but I think there's a lot packed into that. There's a lot behind the scenes on that in terms of our plans and our development of those plans over the next couple of years. And I think that's really important. And I think it's important that we really quite outwardly promoting this because we need organisations to realise their own responsibilities as well to actually comply with this because this is, from my perspective, a really important part to make sure that we've got that information in the right places and it's safely and securely shared across those various areas. So in short, that's what we've tried to achieve as part of the strategy. Happy to take any questions.
Excellent. Should we do that at the end, Darren?
Okay. Yeah, fine.
Then we'll see how the parts fit together.
Yeah, Steph. Nice to see you, Steph.
So for those independent members that haven't met me, I'm Steph Harris, the Associate Director for Clinical Informatics and Business Change. I'm fairly new into Digital Healthcare Wales. I've been here nearly a year now. On the 1st of November, I'll be a year in. So the strategy for clinical informatics and business change is in a little bit of a different place to information governance and information services, as we're less mature. So what I mean by that is that the services and the provision that we've got at the moment has grown organically. The predominant funding for my team is from the DPIF programme funding from Welsh Government. And the teams have been born out of requirements for clinical informatics, clinical leadership within the programmes, and also from on the business change side, the e-learning packages, and then the adoption and deployment that we support with our products. In addition to that, we've also got the Change Ambassador Programme, which is the start of our accredited learning journey. And that's been running for just over 12 months now. And we had our successful graduation for that, our first graduation in the summer this year. So we focused on getting the foundations in this strategy. So there's 4 aims. The first 2 aims have got a predominant bias towards clinical informatics, and we've aligned those with the health and care standards and with our duty of quality. So our first aim is around maximising our support for health and care provision. And I think from a clinical informatics perspective, we've got a real opportunity to change the perception of our organisation from previously a supplier of software products to a really strong partnership arrangement with NHS Wales. And with the addition of our clinicians and our expertise that we can bring from our team, I think that really gives us the opportunity to work much more closely with our NHS colleagues in that space. So aim 1 is around a focus on building what will probably be called a clinical informatics framework to look at how we provide assurance, how we do clinical safety, work with Darren's team on future clinical risk standards, etc. Aim 2 is around quality, and that's how we bring in our professional standards from our clinicians and how we link into our future product operating model with Digital Healthcare Wales and bring the value from clinical informatics and business change into the products. 3 is around learning, and that's what I touched on a minute ago. So we've started to develop our learning capabilities so that when we go out there with our projects, programs and products to deploy products into NHS Wales, there is already a capability there in terms of business change and a digital understanding. So our Change Ambassador Programme is the first programme that's starting to support digital capability and that network of advocates across Wales that will support our organisation with the digital maturity agenda. We've got some other accredited courses as part of the Digital Change Delivery Network, so one around coaching and mentoring, and then customer service. And within our strategy, we're also having conversations across our directorate, so with Darren and outside of the directorate with the quality team, on what we could offer in the future. So things around information governance, accredited training, and also, as I mentioned before, clinical risk management. Aim 4 is around the business change bias of enabling transformation, and that's how we support delivery of benefits, the value that we bring, increasing the skills and competencies across our own organisation for digital change, but also with our partner organisations. And then that service improvement element to make sure that we've got the appropriate adoption and deployment of the current products that we offer as an organisation. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. As I said, Rachel's not here, so I'll make a poor attempt at covering her excellent strategy. And no doubt there'll be some questions on this one, which I will endeavour to answer. So the Information Intelligence and Research Division essentially has 3 components. That's the information services, the important e-library services, and remember that provides access to information across health and social care, and the research and innovation teams. And obviously we're looking at data collection, information to be used to provide knowledge and insight into what we're doing, how we're doing it, and those outcomes. The maturity of this is young, as you know. We are in the NHS, we struggle often to retain highly specialised analytic expertise, because that is sought after. So we employ other mechanisms than wage packets to ensure that our staff feel valued and loved within our organisation, because they're producing great things for the service. So that's part of it. We're in an exciting position with these opportunities, with the NDR going live. The anticipation that artificial intelligence is somehow going to save healthcare, and there can be a wider debate on that, and that we're being seen as a trusted partner in collaboration across a number of sectors, which is great. The vision is quite clear: to drive the value from data. The mechanism is there, and the strategic aims of which, again, you'll see it conforms to a pattern of 4. I don't plan to go through those in detail, other than to highlight that aim 1 is providing national information and analytics service that embraces innovation. So, as Darren will often tell me, information governance is to promote sharing of information in a safe way. And therefore, we will embrace innovation within the frameworks that we have available to us. Aim 2 is a focus on quality and value from user experience of our services, and that is clinical and occasionally the non-clinical, particularly the patients, and how our products look and feel and allow us to collect information in a structured way that can be used to produce value. Aim 3, maximising our offer and value through effective collaboration. I touched on that. And 4, investing in our people, and that fits with the organisational culture and values. So I hope you've enjoyed reading it. I think it's well presented. Credit to the team, and we'll move to a Q&A.
Rowan, you're on mute again.
Thank you, Rydian, and thank you, Rachel in the form of Rydian there, but appreciating all of her work and leadership that's gone into that. David, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I'll just make a couple of comments first, if I may. So Rydian and Stephanie and Darren and Rachel, if you were here, I've really enjoyed going through each of the strategies, and I think you've done a good job. They all complement each other, so well done on that. There's a lot of really good stuff in this, so I'm going to be a little bit picky and just say it would be even better if some of the things were added. So I take it in that context of it's a really good piece of work, but I'm just sort of layering a little bit on top, if I may. So with the clinical information and business change strategy, being very picky, but there's a couple of references to a national benefits realization framework and a digital benefits realization framework. I'm assuming that they're the same thing. If they are, we probably need to be consistent on the language, because one of the things that often confuses is you call something subtly different and everybody's then wondering if it's the same thing. So that's a bit of a picky point. In terms of the outcomes, it would be really good if one of the outcomes was benefits realization framework is widely deployed and used. And we've also got some use cases of things that we've done, and we can point to the value realization. And the reason I emphasize that is, in my experience of having to have done this in a previous life, that's the bit that really drives the traction with our stakeholders and the calls on our services. So if you want to drive traction with the services we're trying to provide you, that's the bit. When you go around and you explain to people what you did and how you delivered value and how the value is realized, that's the bit where all of a sudden people come to you more than they would do. So that's why I think it's important. In terms of the analytics strategy, again, there's a really load of good stuff in there. But the one thing that's missing is I don't get a sense of our ambition from the strategy. It sets out all the things we need to do to go on a journey. But any good strategy will say by 2026, this is what we will look like, which is a bit different to what we look like today. And the sort of things I'm thinking of in terms of the sort of tasking that we've got today, it's we have to work collaboratively or we get told what to do. There may be a little bit of things that we initiate, but the mix of those three over the period of the 3 years, I would hope is changing so that by the end of 3 years, we've built up sufficient credibility within the organisation that we're actually taking the lead on some of those things, and the tasks that we're undertaking are things that we've generated for ourselves. The size of the team that we'll have in 3 years' time, ultimately, I think there's huge opportunity here. So there's potentially a lot of growth. And the last thing was having some measurements around the value that's delivered in 3 years' time, or it doesn't have to be precise value, but something in the in range of value. So what's our ambition? What are we trying to do to save the NHS some money? And I come from the position of, I think what we're doing with NDR and these three strategies is we've got the means to deliver significant change to the NHS, which is what I would support strongly. But I don't sense from we haven't sort of mapped out a position of where we want to be in 3 years' time. Now that might be because we're operating in very constrained circumstances, which I accept. But it would be nice to see what our ambition is in terms of if these things come together, what does it look like in 3 years' time?
Okay.
Thank you, David.
I've written a few things down there, David. I'll give Steph the opportunity to come in with a specific question to her division.
Yeah, I think I'm just thinking I maybe needed to make it clearer. On the benefits realisation framework, we're not leading on it. So it's a finance initiative. So I think absolutely accept your comments, and I probably need to make it much more explicit that we're supporting that work. So it's a finance framework, and what we're doing is supporting it by building a digital tool to help people to implement it. So absolutely take your comments and I'll change that.
Okay.
Thank you, Stephanie.
So a couple of comments back from me. So return on investment is much more than finance.
I'm glad you said that, Ridian, because I think that's the bit that we don't talk about enough. It's driving outcomes, and reducing demand is just is more valuable.
Yeah, and these strategies in the clinical division that sits within the organisation, that sits under the strategy of our ambition, which is to deliver world-leading digital services. But I appreciate we haven't, particularly in any forward, set that out in lights, David, and perhaps, and I think probably where I'd like this to get to is that the three of them are combined as chapters within a strategy, and the opportunity to add a forward as to why these things are important. The team size comment is noted, and I've made a previous sort of comment on that. I think the thing about the benefits realization is the understanding that safety is enhanced by collecting, storing, and sharing, and safer care is actually cheaper care. Better outcomes are the ambition, but safety is the key measurable. And to highlight some of the ways that we're thinking of looking at some of those benefits, David, is we're working closely now with the Ombudsman to look at themes of harm that could be potentially mitigated by implementation of digital systems, some of which the digital functionality, some of which is already available today. Areas perhaps where we ought to focus and prioritize digital solutions. And we're also working with the Welsh Risk Pool, and you'll be aware that the Welsh Risk Pool is essentially a fund that everyone contributes, the health boards, etc., or the service, to pay out for harm. And again, there's an opportunity there to look for themes. So I think I just wanted to highlight that safety is paramount, better outcomes, and we will look at how we can demonstrate value in ways that perhaps aren't necessarily cost reducing. And we must try and do that in a way that everyone can understand it. Colleagues on here are focused on digital. That is not necessarily the case across all the leadership groups. If people truly want to understand the value of digital, switch it off and see what happens. And you know, to be at its most basic level. So I think this is the start of that journey of emphasising what these teams can do, and what value they add to the organisation, and is a good starter for 10, I think, David.
And thank you, Rhydian. Can I just sort of pause there and just acknowledge that Alistair needs to depart. So thank you, Alistair, for making yourself available, and we're aware of that. David, before I ask Marilyn to come in.
Yeah, just a couple of, so thanks, Rhydian, for what you said. I would fully support it. Just again, to share my experience, when I had to sort of define value in terms of the role that I had in industry, I came up with about 5 different categories of value, and not all of them were financial. One was safety, because anything to do with the safety of an aircraft engine, had a, you couldn't put a price on it, because ultimately, if people lost their lives, how do you measure that value? So my experience was you have to define a number of different types of value and be clear about, and generally getting some buy-in that those are meaningful statements you're making. And then the very last thing I just wanted to pick up, because I didn't make it earlier and I forgot, was in the clinical informatics and business change strategy, we refer to a mixed economy funding model, which I thought was an interesting phrase. And I just wanted some reassurance that this is something that is on Claire's list of things. I mean, it's not going to get solved in the next year or so, but in terms of the funding model going forward, is this part of what she's trying to get fixed?
Yes. So, if you don't mind, Steph, I'll take this question. The money comes into the organisation through a number of different means. There's core funding. There's programs in development that are sort of pump prime, DPIP. And there are those live programs that are continually improving. It's difficult to engage and employ people with professional clinical qualifications in this arena on a permanent basis without having permanent funding. And we don't have permanent funding because of the mechanism of the way the money is coming in. So that's why it's sort of put as a mixed economy. And to reassure you, the Director of Finance, like she does with all the fellow executive directors, keeps a very close eye on the maths and what we are spending our money on and what value it potentially brings within those programs. One of the other things I wanted to add is we are not the only organisation who deliver value. In fact, we probably facilitate more organisations to deliver value than we deliver the value ourselves, as in coming out of the door with a Digital Healthcare Wales stamp on it. And particularly, I would point to the Value in Healthcare programme, which is has a great dependency on the work of our organisation and particularly Rachel. Thank you. Marilyn, so patient.
Sorry, I was just leading on from what has already been said, really. Thank you for a really informative report from yourselves, Stephanie and Darren and Rachel. Just want to say, really, it's about the wider value case, and it's that people who are engaging with us as an organisation will have different ideas of what that is. So just like David said, perhaps for us to layer it, for different, the moral case, the business cases, the wider societal case, and talking about trust and safety, for some people will be the top of will come top. But I think it's really important for me to recognise that, as an independent board member, the work of your department and all the departments within DHCW in the collaboration space because a lot of people wouldn't be able to do what they do without us. And I think that, you know, perhaps that's something that we should highlight more as DHCW, because that's the nature of our work. You know, that's why we want to be a world-class digital leader. That's our, you know, a big emphasis for us. So I think that in the future, perhaps we'll let you know, other people, external organisations, know a bit more about the collaboration that's taking place all the time at DHCW. So I just wanted to add that. So yeah.
Thank you, Marilyn. I absolutely agree with that. And our communications department are encouraged now to look at the good news and the benefit that our organisation adds within the family of the wider NHS. Just to go back to the Welsh Risk Pool, 75 million per annum. You know, if you could take a significant saving out of that and use it for direct healthcare, you know, you would go some way to improving the wider service, wouldn't we?
Yeah, Ridian, and I think we also heard on one of the R&I projects, so the semaglutide trial in type 2 diabetes to prevent complications of type 2 diabetes. And you know, if you look at the amount of the NHS budget that goes to type 2 diabetes, I wouldn't know the precise numbers in Wales, but generally the majority of that investment is allocated to patients who are experiencing those complications. It's about 80% of the budget goes into the complications management. If prescribing a generic medicine, which I think semaglutide is, to type 2 diabetes patients who are at risk, maintains their health, that is a fantastic outcome for those patients and a good outcome to the NHS in Wales, and is absolutely consistent with developing better care. So I think that just talks about the kind of different skill sets and operations needed to impact in a healthcare system. I think I'd echo David's comments that I think it's a great three-legged stool that is going to support transformation of the business. Stephanie, I want to commend you on the clinical informatics and business change piece. I think the increased emphasis and visibility that DHCW is giving to business change, we've seen it transforming the success and adoption of some of the investments that we make in developing services. You know, there's many of them, but the one that I suppose as IMs we're most aware of is the nursing care record, you know, and the work that was done there, and you know, great best practice. So really, I'm pleased to see that, and I think there's a, you know, what it feels like to me as we chair these sessions and we hear these reports. It goes back to what Keith was talking about, this working at the interface across the system that we have to deliver our services across is becoming a much more intentional part of what DHCW is doing. And I think that's phenomenal, because without it, we don't get sight of how we are impacting the wider system. So, you know, whether the value is you know, generated within our walls or within our customer base, ultimately it's for the benefit of the people of Wales. So that is absolutely consistent with what we should be doing. So good job.
No, that is good. So just finally to give an example that people can probably hook into, relating to how these three divisions sit together. Well, you mentioned diabetes, 1 in 6 people with diabetes. The visibility of the various complications and aspects of care relating to diabetes in a record that's visible across all health sectors, where a diabetic patient may go, adds value, because diabetic patients have peripheral vascular disease, they have cardiac disease, they have neurology, they have ophthalmology problems. And we link all those together in the direct delivery. And absolutely nephrology. In fact, most ologies have diabetes as a cause. That's very true. Having collected that data, we can legitimately, securely, safely share and learn from it, and present that information through, say, Rachel's. So Darren's division is the advice that allows us to learn how we can use that data. And then Rachel's division can expose that information in a way that the service can consume it to understand how to improve the service. And that then delivers an economic benefit because we remove less legs, less people go blind, quality of life, longevity of life is increased. And that brings an economic value, and it also brings a benefit to the individual and the communities in which they live. So it's quite a nice way to hook the three teams working closely together. And I'd just like to put on record, I'm very grateful for their leadership and the teams that they run. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well said, Rydian. Thank you very much for that. And I'm now going to close us late. I do apologise for that. Is there any other urgent business? I don't think so. That's great. Highlight the items for the Chair's highlight report. I'd like to, Chris, I'd like to highlight the active management of risk and how I think our handling and active management of risks in the business has been maturing very well. I'd like to highlight that all of the assurance reports were received. They were high quality and provided assurance to the committee. And I'd like to make the observation of how the organisation is intentionally working across the system and looking at those handoff points. So through what Keith provided in the Incident Review Organisation Learning Report and indeed the clinical strategies. And I'd like to congratulate Michelle on the establishment of the IP policy. Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to suggest that the date of the next meeting is Thursday, February the 1st, and 2024, another year older, 1 p.m. There should be a 10-minute comfort break, and I'm hoping that the board sec is going to be kinder in terms of the weight of activities for this committee to consider. Thank you, everyone.